The system does not break men in public, it rents them first. It gives a man a role before it gives him a name. Useful, agreeable, patient, stable. The man who keeps his head down and absorbs the blow without making the room uncomfortable. The man who carries the weight and thanks the people standing on his back for giving him somewhere to stand. Then, when the knees finally buckle, when the eyes lose light, when the smile becomes unpaid labor wearing teeth, the same society that trained him to bleed on command will look down at the stain on the floor and call it a character flaw. That is the humiliation, not the suffering, the billing error afterward. There is a word for what they do to a man before he figures this out. Not manipulation, that word is too small. What they do is older than manipulation. It is architecture, a structure built before he was born, designed to convert his capacity into their convenience, his silence into their safety, his goodness into their cover. And the genius of the architecture is that it never announces itself. It arrives wearing the language of love, of loyalty, of community, of what a real man does. A man who has spent years inside that structure and finally walks out into the open air does not feel liberated at first. He feels strange. He feels guilty. He feels like something he was promised has been taken from him when, in reality, he is just experiencing what it feels like to breathe without someone's hand over his mouth. There are 7 types of men this machine especially loves, not because they are weak, because they are legible, easy to read, easy to root, easy to extract from. Each one carries a different design flaw. The system exploits a different point of entry through which the extraction happens. Each one is celebrated on arrival, depleted in the middle, and discarded at the end with the same bored efficiency a corporation applies when updating its supplier contracts. The first type is the man every institution needs to function. The last type is the man who thinks he escaped the machine and in some ways is the most trapped of all. Stay with this, because the last type has a mirror in it. And almost every man watching has seen his own reflection in that mirror without knowing what he was looking at. The first is the man society flatters into believing his highest form is function. He is there before anyone asks. He sees the gap and fills it before the problem is named, covers the shift, absorbs the extra, drives the distance, fixes the mess someone else made, and returns to his original position without requiring acknowledgement, because requiring acknowledgement was never part of his programming. He is the scaffolding inside every building that other people take credit for. The load-bearing wall no architect ever signs. He does not get respected. He gets depended on. And there is a crucial difference between those two things that the machine never teaches him directly. A man who is depended on is infrastructure. Infrastructure is maintained only until it becomes cheaper to replace. The moment a pipe stops delivering water, it is not mourned, it is swapped. The machine treats this man exactly that way, except it trained him to feel noble about being the pipe, to feel strong about being the one everyone leans on, to confuse the weight of other people's convenience for the weight of his own significance. Sit with that for a second, because the cruelty here is elegant. The machine never insults him directly. It decorates the cage with beautiful words instead. Reliable, loyal, mature, consistent. What extraordinary wrapping paper for a life spent being available to people who would not cross a car park to return the favor. He hears those words and feels seen. That is by design. The validation is the mechanism. The praise is the leash. A man like this sits in rooms full of people who call him solid, and not one of them means irreplaceable. They mean recyclable. He is everybody's emergency contact and nobody's emergency. His phone lights up when someone needs help moving house and goes strangely silent when his own life catches fire. There is a name for what the machine does with this type of man. This channel calls it utility worship, the cult of making a man's capacity to carry weight the only credential that earns him peace, not his mind, not his presence, not his grief or his joy, or the interior life he has almost certainly been trained to consider secondary, just his output, his availability, his willingness to be consumed without complaint. Once a man sees utility worship, he starts noticing the small humiliations that used to pass as normal. The joke that only lands when he is the punchline, the affection that arrives only after he has solved something. The way a room visibly relaxes when he makes himself smaller so that everyone else can remain comfortable. Rome understood the architecture of this before anyone gave it a name. The empire was constructed on the backs of men trained to believe endurance was honor, sacrifice was purpose, and that the standards they marched under represented a contract that included them. It did not. The legionaries built roads they would never own, secured wealth they would never touch, and died for a political class that would have replaced them within the season. The genius of Rome was not force. It was ceremony, suffering wrapped in ritual, pain given a uniform. And the men who marched in that uniform did not feel cheated, they felt chosen. That mechanism did not die with the empire. It changed clothes. The badge replaced the standard. The performance review replaced the medal ceremony. The empty LinkedIn endorsement replaced the laurel crown. But the structure is identical. Produce, absorb, do not require. And when the system is done with you, it will hold a meeting about resilience over the ruins of your nervous system and wonder aloud why retention is low. A man who has lived inside utility worship for years carries a specific kind of tiredness. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The tiredness of a man who has been generous with people who were only ever efficient with him. The tiredness of someone who gave meaning and received utility in return and spent so long calling that arrangement love that he forgot what love without a price tag looked like. There is a second type, and this one is even harder to see because the machine has convinced him his greatest virtue is the thing killing him. He is the agreeable man. The one whose edges were sanded down so early by a parent's disapproval, by a classroom's mockery, by a relationship that punished him for having needs that now he calls his own erasure kindness. He perfected the art of reading a room before he entered it. He knows exactly how to lower a temperature that someone else raised. He apologizes before being accused. He softens his sentences before the other person can find them offensive. He is the human buffer in every room, absorbing impact, smoothing friction, performing harmony so that everyone around him can remain comfortably themselves while he remains comfortably invisible. Society adores him. At first, he makes toxic relationships last longer than they deserve. He makes dysfunctional families appear functional from the outside. He makes workplaces more efficient, not because anything is fixed, but because his permanent concession prevents the confrontation that might fix it. He is social lubricant in human form. Every broken system keeps one nearby. Then comes the stage nobody warned him about. The same softness that got him praised begins, slowly, and then all at once, to become the reason nobody trusts him with anything real. The same people who say he is so understanding begin talking over him in meetings, begin making decisions around him rather than with him. Desire drains from rooms when he walks in. He is called sweet with the same affectionate condescension adults use for a dog wearing a birthday hat. An intelligent woman reads this particular architecture faster than most men do, not because she is cruel, but because she has a nervous system calibrated for safety and a man with no edges creates a specific discomfort she can rarely articulate, but almost always feels. His agreeableness reads as performance. His softness reads as effort. And effort has a smell. The man who is constantly trying to be easy to love begins to look like a salesman in a suit made of consent. He thinks he is creating safety. Often he is creating zero gravity. Nothing lands, no center of mass, no voltage, no boundary solid enough to generate respect. Machiavelli was writing about this man 5 centuries ago, and he was not sympathetic. He documented, with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a man who had watched idealism fail in the most spectacular political theater of the Renaissance, that warmth without leverage is weather. It shifts. It cannot be counted on. Fear without hatred, applied correctly, is more stabilizing than any arrangement built on goodwill. The agreeable man's fantasy that if he is kind enough, patient enough, harmless enough, the world will recognize his value and protect him is a fantasy the system was designed to sell him. And the system has sold it aggressively because a man who believes it is a man who never negotiates. This channel calls what is done to this type of man the legibility tax. The hidden price a man pays when everything he needs, fears, and will tolerate can be read off his face before he finishes a sentence. The machine loves legible men, transparent men, men whose responses can be predicted and therefore managed. The agreeable man paid the legibility tax his entire life and never once received a receipt. He just noticed, one day, that the account was empty and that everyone who had drawn from it was still spending freely. The third type swallows things. He stores insult in the body and calls it discipline. He waits. He endures. He tells himself patience is a strategy, that time will reveal character, that karma is a structural feature of the universe rather than a romantic idea invented to keep quiet men quiet. Meanwhile, the people who wronged him are not waiting. They are rebuilding their public image, reframing events, recruiting allies. Arriving early to every conversation in which his absence will be used as a verdict, dark humor is sometimes more precise than philosophy. Some men write beautifully worded letters to justice and address them directly to a building that has never existed. The handwriting is immaculate. The postal address is a wish. A man who has survived character assassination will know the next part without needing it explained. The stomach does not drop when the betrayal happens. It drops 3 months later when he walks into a room and realizes everyone in it was briefed before he arrived. That the story congealed while he was busy being dignified. That his silence, the silence he wore like a coat of honor, was used to write the official version of events in his absence. Narrative stripping is what this channel calls that process. The mechanism by which a man's stillness is converted into his enemy's authorship. He thinks he is taking the high road. He is leaving the recording equipment unattended in a room full of people who know exactly how to use it. Thomas More knew something about this. He went to the scaffold in 1535 not because he was wrong, but because he was slow to understand that in Henry VIII's court, righteous silence was not a shield, it was an invitation. While More was carefully constructing his position on the matter of the king's marriage, the court was constructing a position on More. By the time he chose to speak, the architecture around him had already been built. His innocence became evidence that he had misread the room because the room, in Tudor England, did not reward innocence. It rewarded positioning. A man who waits for justice in a system that runs on narrative does not get justice. He gets a retrospective where people say he should have spoken up sooner. Let that land. Because the swallowing man is celebrated precisely while his silence is useful. While he endures, he is praised for his maturity. While he absorbs, he is admired for his resilience. The moment the damage hardens and the story sets, and there is nothing left to extract from his patience, the same audience that applauded the endurance shrugs and uses the endurance as evidence that there was never anything worth saying. He is discarded in the most precise way possible. He is discarded with his own good character as the instrument. The fourth type is the man modern civilization built its entire productivity mythology around. The ambition mule. He runs not toward something but away from something, away from the memory of feeling small, powerless, overlooked, or not enough. He has dressed that retreat in the language of hustle and discipline and the pursuit of excellence, and society rewards him handsomely for the costume, while the thing underneath goes unexamined. Bigger title, better watch, better body, better postcode, more proof, more symbols. One more milestone that will finally confirm to him, to the boy in the memory, to the people who underestimated him, that he arrived. The machine points him at the treadmill, whispers that arrival is exactly one promotion away, and then moves the finish line every time his lungs adapt. At first, he looks impressive, disciplined, driven, dangerous. Then, slowly, his eyes go flat. Relationships become negotiations for access to his time. Rest begins to feel like theft from a future he is still building. The body starts sending invoices for all the stimulants, the swallowed panic, the years of treating self-worth like a quarterly report. He becomes expensive to know, then boring. Then, in the most brutal irony available, replaceable, because the machine that built the mythology never intended for the men inside it to retire as winners. It intended for them to be productive until they were spent. An intelligent woman reads the ambition mule before he finishes his second sentence, not because she dislikes ambition, she does not, because she can distinguish between directed force and manic compensation, between a man building towards something and a man running from something, wearing buildings' clothing. Society teaches men that visible effort is always compelling. It is not. Effort that smells like pleading is the least attractive thing in any room. A man frantically constructing a life to prove he is enough is still orbiting the judgment of the people who made him feel like he was not, even if those people have been dead for years. The ambition mule is not free. His chains are gold-plated and issued by the same machine that will eventually benchmark him against his replacement. The fifth type is the man selected to make the system look honest, the moral mascot. He is elevated not because the institution loves virtue, but because virtue is excellent camouflage for everything that happens out of view. He believes in the principles deeply enough to be used through them. Duty, integrity, responsibility, service. He is the man placed in the front window while the people above him operate by an entirely different set of rules in the back office. He gets the speech. They get the exemptions. He gets held to the standard. They get the loopholes. He is the proof the institution can point to when accusations arrive. Look, we have people like him here. He makes the rot presentable. He launders the cynicism by existing in proximity to it while remaining visibly uncorrupted. Late Republican Rome perfected this particular technology. Cato the Younger became the embodiment of incorruptibility in a political order that had no actual use for incorruptibility, only for its image. He was useful to men like Julius Caesar and Pompey, not because they admired what he stood for, but because the existence of a man who genuinely stood for something created useful contrast. A system with one visibly righteous man can do an enormous amount of unrighteous business in the shadow of his reputation. Then comes the pivot. The institution changes its public position. The ideology that selected him evolves into something he cannot follow without betraying himself. The family rewrites the events that established his role, and the man who spent a decade being the living proof of the institution's goodness discovers, in the same week, that the institution's goodness was always ornamental and that he was the ornament. He was never in the building. He was on the brochure. Sit with that. Because some men will recognize this in a friendship, in a relationship, in a family system, in a workplace. The structure that put them forward as its best example has been the most efficient user of them, because a man who believes in something hard enough can be aimed at almost anything without his consent. The sixth type is the man. The machine has learned to neutralize without confrontation. The entertained man, the pacified one, the permanently stimulated one who carries his anesthesia in his pocket and doses himself with it every time reality threatens to become uncomfortable. He is not asleep. He is sedated. The machine discovered something important about male pain. A man in pain who cannot convert that pain into focus is not dangerous. He is just uncomfortable. But a man in pain who does convert it into focus, who gets very still and very specific about what was done to him and by what mechanism, that man is expensive. That man asks questions the machine cannot afford to answer, so the machine built 1,000 small exits from the moment of stillness, endless content streams calibrated to his nervous system, outrage designed to feel urgent and evaporate by morning, spectacle that scratches every cognitive itch without resolving any of them. Digital access to lifestyles he cannot sustain, women he will never meet, arguments he cannot influence, achievements that make his own life feel insufficient by comparison. He is not being entertained. He is being processed. Dark humor, again, is more efficient than analysis. Some men are not living lives. They are renting their own nervous systems from companies that would not recognize their names in a lift, and then checking in every 45 minutes to see if the rent went up. The entertained man's humiliation is quieter than the others, not delivered through open disrespect, delivered through erosion. His appetite is turned against him. His loneliness is monetized so efficiently that he begins to confuse the product with the person, the platform with the relationship, the algorithm with the friend who actually knows his name. And then, and this is the part that is genuinely vicious, the machine mocks him for it, calls him lazy, undisciplined, unmotivated. A broken generation. The dealer has always had contempt for the addict. The contempt is part of the product. The seventh type is the man who looked at the machine, identified the problem with precision, and then built his entire identity out of the identification. The predictable rebel. The one who saw the hypocrisy early, left the approved script, stopped kneeling for cheap approval, grew harder, sharper, more suspicious of the structures that tried to contain him. All of that was correct. All of that was necessary. And then the trap arrived. Not dressed as a cage, dressed as freedom. He built an identity made entirely of opposition. He became anti-this, anti-everything. He learned to diagnose before he learned to construct. He became fluent in exposure, devastating in argument, and quietly, without noticing it was happening, dependent on the existence of the very dysfunction he claimed to despise. Because without something to push against, the question becomes, what is he building toward? And the answer, when he is honest, is often nothing yet. I am still finishing the demolition. Reaction is not independence. Inversion is not freedom. The pendulum that swings from one extreme to the other is not free, it is attached. Attached to the same fixed point it appears to be escaping. This is where the mirror becomes uncomfortable. An intelligent woman reads this particular type in one conversation. Not because she disagrees with his diagnosis, often she agrees with every word. She leaves because his energy has no architecture, he is all sharpness and no blueprint, all blade and no direction. He is compelling for an evening, exhausting for a life. A man who is permanently reacting to decay is still being choreographed by decay. He handed the conductor's baton to the thing he hated and told it to keep setting the tempo. That is the mirror most men would rather look away from, because it arrives wearing their own face. 7 types. 1. Mechanism. Different costumes, different entry points, different names for the leash, but the same fundamental design. Every one of these men still needs something from the system that diminishes him. Approval, belonging, vindication, status, purpose, anesthesia, opposition, and a system that can locate the dependency, can locate the handle. It does not need to understand you. It just needs to know which door is still open. You were given programming before you had the vocabulary to refuse it. Before you had standards, the machine installed cravings. Before you had language for yourself, the script was already running. Before you could decide what kind of man to become, the function was assigned and you were handed it back wrapped in words like character and identity and who you naturally are. That is not a moral failure. That is engineering. This is the channel where the architecture gets exposed. Every system, every mechanism, every design feature they built into you and called your personality. If the description of one of those 7 types made your chest tighten not because it was dramatic, but because it was familiar, then what you just heard was not a list of other men's problems. It was the blueprint of the machine that has been processing you. Type used in the comments if the architecture just became visible. Type leash if one of those dependencies just got a name. Type blueprint if something shifted. Those are not social media labels. They are a diagnostic. And the people who do not type anything, who scroll past the prompt, have made the most expensive choice available in this comment section. Subscribe, not for content. Because this is the channel where the design gets shown, and every video is a piece of the system. Miss one, and the blind spot the system built remains exactly where the system put it. Now, the weapon. Because naming the cage is not the same as being free of it, a man can spend 3 years consuming every book about power, every lecture about manipulation, every breakdown of every system that exploits him, and still report to all of them every morning. Recognition without change is the machine's preferred outcome. It loves an educated inmate, a man who can articulate the architecture of his own exploitation in extraordinary detail, and then continue volunteering for it because the alternative feels too costly. The weapon is not awareness. Awareness is the beginning of the map. The weapon is what happens when the map is translated into access decisions. Denied access. That is the mechanism, not anger, not confrontation. Not a dramatic exit or a performance of liberation. Cold, structural, non-negotiable removal of the entry points through which the machine reaches into a man's behavior and rearranges it. The version of you that was endlessly available to people who were not worth the availability, that man has to be retired. Not angrily, with the quiet efficiency of a company discontinuing a product line that was never profitable. The version of you that rushed to explain clean motives to people with dirty intentions, gone. The version that could be baited into defending himself against accusations he did not owe an answer to, gone. The version whose guilt could be activated by people who were not paying for the service, gone. The version that took bad company because loneliness made it look like relief, gone. The version that confused being needed with being valued, being called solid with being respected, being on the brochure with being in the building, that version needs a burial, not a dramatic funeral, just a discontinuation. This is where the change stops being theoretical and starts being precise. People stop getting the version of you they were trained to receive, the endlessly available version. The one who provides context on demand, the one who can be reached at any hour for any reason by any person who learned to take advantage of the open door. That is when the punishment starts. Not because you became cruel, because you became expensive, difficult to process, no longer formatted for easy extraction. And the people who depended on your predictability will react to that unpredictability with a vocabulary they have never used about you before. Selfish, cold, changed, hard to reach, too serious, not the same person, good. Those are not criticisms, those are proof of concept. Those words, selfish, cold, changed, are the machine's error message when it reaches for the old access points and finds that the door has been removed rather than locked. A locked door can be knocked on. A door that no longer exists generates a different response entirely. Real power does not begin when people start admiring you. It does not begin when your progress is acknowledged, when you are described as healed or awakened or evolved. It begins when the people who depended on behavioral access to you lose it and discover that the old levers move nothing. When guilt stops opening the gate, when urgency stops purchasing obedience, when the loneliness that used to make bad company look like relief is replaced by something quieter and far more difficult to explain to someone who has never felt it. The particular piece of a man who chose his own company over an arrangement that was costing him, when being misunderstood by the wrong people stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like information. That is the moment the machine encounters a man it was not built to process. Not every relationship will survive this. Some were built entirely on access to the version of you that is being retired. When that version goes, the relationship discovers it had no other structure. That is not loss, that is inventory. And a man who has learned the difference between loss and inventory is no longer easy to keep in arrangements that serve everyone except him. Some institutions will turn strange. The workplace that rewarded the utility worship will not immediately know what to do with a man who does the work, does it excellently, and then when it is done, stops, does not volunteer for the additional extraction, does not cover the gaps that other people's carelessness created, does not absorb the overflow that was never in his job description and never came with compensation, only with the understanding that he was the kind of man who could be counted on to not make this difficult. A man who does the work and then stops is not lazy. He is expensive. And expensive men make systems uncomfortable because systems are built on the assumption that the men inside them will not price themselves accurately. This is not revenge. Revenge is still powered by the machine. It requires the machine to respond in order to mean anything. Revenge is just another dependency with better branding. What replaces it is colder and more functional. Refusal. Refusal to be formatted for other people's convenience. Refusal to narrate yourself to audiences that were always going to use the narration against you. Refusal to keep presenting the soft tissue of your interior life to people who have already demonstrated, through their behavior, not their words, that they convert disclosure into leverage. Refusal to remain readable. to systems that profit from the reading. The machine survives on men whose responses can be forecast, men whose guilt can be activated on a schedule, men whose loneliness can be monetized, men whose need to be seen as good can be converted into unpaid labor, men whose decency functions as a subsidy for people who have none. Once a man sees that clearly, not just intellectually, not just as a useful concept to think about, but as a structural truth about how his specific life has been organized, the question stops being whether the system is fair. The system is not fair. That was never the question. The question is whether he is still volunteering data, still leaving the doors open, still allowing the access that makes the extraction possible. There is a video on this channel called The 4 Levels of Masculine Will, and it covers the internal hierarchy that operates underneath every one of the 7 types described here. That video shows the machinery inside the man. This one showed you the machinery outside him. Together, they form a complete diagnostic. Without the internal map, this one is only half the picture. Without this one, the internal map has no context. The blind spot between them is where most men remain permanently. The man who cannot be rushed, who does not speed up because someone else created urgency, is expensive. The man who cannot be baited, who does not defend himself to people who are not owed a defense, is expensive. The man who cannot be guilted, whose conscience belongs to his own value system rather than to whoever most recently expressed disappointment, is expensive. The man who cannot be decoded, whose next move cannot be read off his face, whose needs cannot be inventoried, whose reactions cannot be reliably predicted by people who intend to use the prediction, is expensive. Expensive men are not loved by systems built on accessible men, but they are free. Not free of difficulty, not free of misunderstanding, not free of the particular loneliness of being someone the world has not yet developed adequate language for, but free of the specific indignity of spending a life being consumed by arrangements that called the consumption love. Most men will spend their lives trying to increase their value to a system built specifically to consume value, generate contempt for the source. A smaller number will see the contract. Fewer still will refuse to sign it. Rarest of all is the man who stops asking the machine to recognize his worth because he has already recognized it himself. Be that man. Or be inventory. Subscribe or let the culture reinstall its software in you, one compromise at a time, one accommodation at a time, one small surrender at a time, until you cannot locate the boundary between who you chose to be and what the system needed you to become. Most men never find that boundary. They spend their lives on the wrong side of it, calling the wrong side home. This is your cold awakening.